Coming up on this Monday edition of Newsline at noon, Israel and Hamas resume their offensives, blaming each other over stalled ceasefire proposals and dashing hopes for a deal to end the fighting in Gaza. Korea's stock market keeps smashing new highs this year as the government's new economic team pushes ahead with expansionary fiscal policies. Plus, with 2 days left until the largest ever by-elections in Korea, rival parties make last-minute efforts to secure crucial parliamentary seats in the National Assembly. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's new Monday, July 28th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this lunchtime, the fighting continues in Gaza, despite flimsy calls for a ceasefire from both the Israeli side and Hamas.
There have been casualties on both sides, but the overwhelming majority of those killed are Palestinian civilians who continue to fear for their lives and are desperate for any kind of help. Connie Lee has more.
Military operations resume in the Gaza Strip. Israeli tanks and soldiers are still positioned along the Israel-Gaza border as the latest call for a temporary truce broke down. The 24-hour humanitarian ceasefire proposed by Hamas early Sunday to mark the end of the Islamic Ramadan holiday was over by Sunday afternoon, with both sides exchanging fire. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu questioned the validity of the Hamas truce and said his country was not going to let a terrorist organization decide when it's convenient to fire at our cities, at our people, and when it's not. Hamas had first rejected Israel's call to extend Saturday's truce, but changed its stance after Israel launched its offensive. Since the conflict flared up on July 8th, more than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed, mostly civilians, including many women and children. Residents consumed with anger and despair attacked the Red Cross office in Gaza, demanding more help evacuating and recovering the dead.
The protesters, they were breaking windows and setting fire inside.
A lot of fighting sometimes, so for people to be able to go to places where are safer within the strip, sometimes it takes time.
It's a scene of massive destruction. Bomb craters and piles of rubble where there used to be homes and a community are seen all around the Gaza Strip as the conflict shows no sign of letting up. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
And this just in, the UN Security Council will meet in about an hour, that is at 1 p.m. Korea time, to call for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. We'll be having more on this in our later newscast. And now, a new report claims Hamas has bought rockets from North Korea in a secret arms deal worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, this is because the Islamist group needs to top up its depleted weapons after thousands of rockets were either fired at Israel or destroyed in Israeli strikes in recent weeks. Sun Jung-in reports.
Thousands of rockets have been fired since the latest conflict between Israel and Hamas erupted on July 8th. And the Islamist group is reportedly keen to replenish its depleted stockpiles. According to the British daily The Telegraph, Hamas militants are attempting to negotiate a new arms deal with North Korea for missiles and communication equipment that will help them continue with their offensive against Israel. The Daily, quoting a senior security official, reported that the deal was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It added that Hamas is now waiting for delivery after it made an initial cash-down payment via a Lebanon-based trading company. The arms deal wouldn't be the first of its kind between the two. In 2009, a freighter carrying 35 tons of North Korean arms was seized in Bangkok, which was, according to Western sources, heading to clients such as Hezbollah and Hamas. Meanwhile, Israeli military commanders also believe North Korean experts have given Hamas advice on building their extensive tunnel networks in Gaza. They believe North Korea, which is believed to have one of the world's most sophisticated network of tunnels running beneath the demilitarized zone with South Korea, has helped Hamas improve their own tunnel network. 손정인, Arirang News.
And in other news, in what has become a popular refrain in recent days, the Kospi has set yet another record high this Monday morning. The nation's benchmark index broke the 2,040 mark in early trading, picking right up where it left off on Friday. Other News' Kim Jian tells us what's behind this latest upward trend.
The Korean stock market rose sharply during the fourth week of July. The Kospi closed at its highest level this year, rising above the 2,030 mark last Friday, led by gains in utility stocks. Last Tuesday, foreign ownership of Korean stocks amounted to more than $420 billion. This is just shy of the previous record set last October. Kang Hyun-jae, an analyst at Seoul-based I'm Investment and Securities, partly attributes the rise to low market interest rates. Four major commercial banks in Korea have lowered interest rates by up to 0.2 percentage point to 1%. Kang says the rise is riding on the back of the economic recovery in China in the second quarter, a sign Beijing's stimulus moves to boost domestic consumption are beginning to have an impact. The world's second largest economy expanded 7.5% in the three-month period from a year ago, up 0.1 percentage point from the previous quarter.
When we look at the types of industries leading the gains, we can see they're related to electricity and communications. They aren't export-driven sectors like the auto and steel industries, which traditionally reflect the state of the Korean economy as a whole.
The Korean economy grew 0.6% in the second quarter from the previous period, its slowest pace in more than a year. The analyst did not rule out the impact of economic plans laid out by the country's new finance minister, but says they alone could not have driven the record-breaking gains seen last week. Kim Jung, Arirang News.
The outstanding bonds from the government's financing have surpassed 500 trillion won. That's about $490 billion for the first time ever. As of last Thursday, the Korea Financial Investment Association says the amount of bonds issued by the government this year stood at $95 billion, a 20% jump from the same period last year. Now, this means the amount of debt future generations will eventually have to pay in taxes has increased. In the face of the global financial crisis, bonds issued by the Korean government hiked drastically from 2008 to 2009 from $58 billion to $92 billion. The figure contracted in 2010 but went back up in 2011 following the Eurozone crisis and has been on a steady rise since then. And moving on, the Chinese mainland is flowing with money that's seeking an investment haven. With a slowing domestic real estate market there, Chinese firms flush with cash are going overseas company shopping. Korea is no exception when it comes to China's aggressive M&A moves, as our Song Ji-san reports.
Chinese companies are busy buying up overseas companies with their huge cash reserves. According to Bloomberg on Monday, Chinese firms spent some $44 billion on global merger and acquisition deals this year, up nearly 40% from a year earlier. Chinese investors have traditionally invested in the domestic real estate market, but with profits eroding amid slowing growth, many are turning to foreign firms for higher gains. And Korea, a close neighbor and home to many advanced IT technologies, is one of the major go-to places for China's investors. Chinese corporate mergers and acquisitions of Korean firms have jumped 27-fold to $661 million this year compared to the same period last year. So what's behind the spike? Well, it's mainly because Asia's biggest internet company, China's Tencent, spent some $500 million buying a 28% share in Korea's CJ Games as it looks to bolster its lineup of online and mobile entertainment. China's IT giants like Tencent, along with Alibaba and Baidu, are fiercely investing in Korean game developers to acquire the skills to invent hit mobile games. On the other hand, Korean firms' investment in Chinese firms through M&A stands at a mere $20 million this year, 1/5 of the volume recorded last year. This is raising concerns Korean firms may lose their own shares while the Chinese aggressively acquire Korean stakes. 송지선, Arirang News.
Now, Koreans will head to the polls on Wednesday to cast their ballots in the nation's largest ever by-elections. And with the clock ticking, candidates from the ruling and opposition parties are doing what they can to get their message across and connect with voters. Our Ji Myung-gil reports.
The July 30th polls carry extra weight because 15 parliamentary seats are up for grabs, the largest total ever for a by-election. The stakes are perhaps greatest in this Seoul and Suwon constituencies, which are considered strategically important as barometers of public sentiment. Candidates of the ruling Saenuri Party have made economic recovery their main platform. They've been touting their party's connection to President Park Geunhye and telling voters they need to maintain a stable majority in parliament in order to carry out the government's economic plans. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, on the other hand, is taking the opposite approach. They've been hammering on the government's failure to arrest Yu Byung-eun, the de facto owner of the ill-fated Seoul ferry, which left more than 300 people dead or missing. To make them more competitive in races against their conservative rivals, the opposition recently unified campaigns in specific constituencies behind one candidate. The by-election comes less than 2 months after local elections in June, which neither the ruling nor the main opposition party claimed victory. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Now, we're in the height of the summer vacation season here in Korea. It's a time where millions of Koreans take a few days off to recharge their batteries. President Park Geunhye is also taking a week's vacation, although she'll be spending it at the presidential office of Cheongwadae. Officials say she will have a very quiet vacation, considering the country is still mourning the victims of April's ferry disaster, and 10 of the passengers to this day remain unaccounted for. The president is expected to continue working on ways to revitalise the sluggish economy and decide on who to nominate for the vacant culture minister post. A week and a half after Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot out of the sky, officials are still trying to gain full access to the crash site in eastern Ukraine. Their progress has been hindered by pro-Russian rebels blamed for the incident. And while the international community is weighing up a variety of options, a military mission appears to be off the table. Shin Se-min reports.
Military superiority through an international mission in this area is, according to our conclusion, not realistic, not even if we have a massive military buildup.
Prime Minister Mark Rutte says the idea of sending international troops to the crash site in rebel-controlled Ukraine is not just unrealistic, but also too risky. While he said all options were on the table, military intervention is apparently not one of them, over fears that the development would only stand to broaden the conflict.
The area is under control of the separatists, consisting of many heavy armed soldiers at a short distance from the Russian border.
They're the same separatists who stand accused of shooting down Flight 17 with nearly 300 people on board. While an earlier deal between Malaysian authorities and the rebels laid the groundwork for an investigation into the disaster, obstructions remain. A team of unarmed Dutch and Australian officers were forced to drop plans to visit the crash site on Sunday due to heavy shelling in the area. More than 200 bodies of the 298 victims in the crash have been recovered. Officials believe the others remain in the plane's wreckage. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
A high-level U.S. official is due in Korea this week to seek support for Washington's sanctions on Russia and Iran. Peter Harrell, the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in charge of sanctions, is scheduled to meet with Korean officials on Tuesday. He is expected to stress that the international community should work in unison to punish Moscow for assisting pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine, who, like the report said, stand accused of downing that Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 earlier this month. Analysts say this entire situation puts Seoul in a pretty tough spot. On the one hand, South Korea is a loyal US ally, but Seoul needs Moscow's help dealing with the threats posed by North Korea. The US official will also bring his South Korean counterparts up to speed on the international negotiations aimed at curbing Iran's nuclear development program that were recently extended for 4 months until November. Time now for a look through some of the other international headlines we're following on this Monday afternoon. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the News Center.
Eunice, let's begin with the conflict in Libya. We're seeing a spike in violation there, the worst since the ouster of former dictator Muammar Gaddafi.
That's right, Jinju. The major cities of Benghazi and Tripoli seeing the brunt of that violence waged amongst rival militias and government forces. Weekend battles in the eastern city of Benghazi pitted militias against forces loyal to the Libyan government for control. Intense shelling continued into Sunday as the Libyan Health Ministry reported 38 people killed and dozens others hurt. The ministry also said nearly 100 people were killed in 1 week of fighting in the capital city of Tripoli, where a coalition of militias are trying to wrangle control of Libya's main airport from Zintan militias, who have maintained control since the 2011 revolution that toppled the Muammar Gaddafi government. Now, on Saturday, the U.S. evacuated its embassy in Tripoli by land to Tunisia as fighting raged at the airport. A joint statement issued by envoys of a string of nations, including the UK, France, Germany, the US, and the Arab League, said the situation in Libya is reaching a critical stage and called for a ceasefire from all sides. In an unscripted addition to his weekly address at St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis made an emotional plea for peace on Sunday. Ahead of the centenary of the start of World War I, he said his thoughts were particularly on crises unfolding in the Middle East, Iraq, and Ukraine. His voice appeared to crack as he made a direct appeal to stop the war, saying, "Brothers and sisters, never war, never war. I am thinking above all of children who are deprived of the hope of a worthwhile life, of a future." The pontiff's remarks came as a humanitarian truce broke down on Sunday in Gaza. Today marks 100 years since the outbreak of the First World War. And now a look at Afghanistan. The American combat mission there is set to wrap by the year's end, and the New York Times reports Taliban forces are already making strategic gains beyond their traditional strongholds in the rural south into regions surrounding the capital of Kabul. It reports Taliban fighters have taken control of key highways as well as districts, forcing hundreds of residents and dozens of police officers to run in the district of Al-Asay. The article included a United Nations report that said its mission saw a 24% rise in civilian casualties in the first half of this year compared to a year before. Afghanistan's defense and interior ministries have stopped releasing casualty data, the daily said, after last year's statistics of army and police deaths raised alarm. Now, following meticulous planning and a $1.5 billion salvage operation so far, the Costa Concordia has arrived at its final destination, a port in the Italian city of Genoa, where it will be scrapped. Despite a storm, the 4-day journey from Giulio, where it had run aground 2.5 years ago, was completed without major incident. The massive ship will be searched for the last remaining victim, still missing 33-year-old waiter Russell Rebello, before being demolished and scrapped, a process estimated to take 2 years. 32 people were confirmed killed in the shipwreck. The ship's captain is being tried for alleged manslaughter after abandoning ship with many passengers and crew still on board.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea. Connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin Ju.
market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
It's really hard nowadays to imagine life without all those smart devices. Well, in line with this trend, the number of smartphone users around the world is expected to reach 2.5 billion by the end of next year. U.S.-based market researcher Strategy Analytics says about 35% of the global population of approximately 7.2 billion will use smartphones in 2015. That means more than 3 in every 10 people will be smartphone users. Industry watchers say the rapid increase in user number can be attributed to the expansion of markets in developing nations where low-end smartphones are being released. According to the market research firm, the number of global users had surpassed 1 billion in 2012. And back here in Seoul, despite government efforts to promote innovative enterprises, many Korean startups are mom-and-pop stores. They account for 37% of all startups in Korea last year, according to a recent report by researcher Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. That's the highest percentage among the 26 countries on which the study was conducted, in contrast with countries like Norway and Switzerland, where the proportion is less than 8%. To diversify the startup landscape, industry experts say the government needs to offer a wider range of programs for aspiring entrepreneurs across all age groups so that they, in turn, can create businesses that add value to the economy.
Now, the practice of crowdsourcing is catching on in a big way here in Korea, with more and more businesses, enterprises, big and small, soliciting contributions from a large group of people, and they're especially doing so from online communities. And the best thing about this is that it's a win-win situation for both parties, as our Park Geunhye reports.
A lively debate is taking place over ways to better industrialize products. LG Electronics started operating a website 2 weeks ago where people can freely pitch their product ideas. If selected for production, the company has agreed to give the creator 4% of the total sales, while another 4% would be available to others who helped in the process of development. Over 8,000 submissions have already been made. Some include a helmet that runs on solar power and a refrigerator with transparent doors that lets people see what's inside.
These insightful ideas for home appliances come from the actual users of the products. We decided to turn these useful ideas into reality by providing ways to commercialize them.
This venture company gives 40% of a product's profits to the person who comes up with the idea. Its CEO believes strongly in the benefits of crowdsourcing.
Creation does not come from a single person. An idea comes to light when many people join forces. I think the true meaning of creation shines through cooperation.
Crowdsourcing goes beyond gathering new ideas and working together. It is proving to be a long, repeated process of collaboration, discussion, and modification that is rewarded with a unique product at the end. Park Geunhye, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Today is Jungbok, the second of the 3 hottest days of the year here in Korea. And in accordance, it's going to be a sweltering hot day. Temperatures will rise to low 30s across the nation. So a heat wave advisory is still in place for some regions, including Daegu, where the temperatures will be over 33 degrees Celsius. So we can expect heat and sunny conditions across the mainland. Also, the UV level is expected to be high in most areas, especially in the central part of the peninsula. So drink plenty of water and gear up with your sun protection items. But as we can see, Jeju is one of the few exceptions, as the UV level there will not be quite as high. Well, that's because monsoon rain began on Jeju early this morning, and between 5 to 40 millimeters of precipitation is expected expected into the evening hours. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The high in the capital will rise to 32, while Daegu will climb to 33, and Gwangju and Busan will have a daily highs of 30 and 29 respectively. Now for other regions, Jeju Island and Daejeon will top out at 28 and 32, and Dokdo should reach 26. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Mark and I will be back at the same time tomorrow. Thank you for watching.